If you want to get around Washington, D.C. without looking like a clueless tourist, stick around for my do's and don'ts for riding on the metro. Hello, my name is Rob. I'm a tour guide and the founder of TripHacksDC Tours. On this channel, I share my best tips, tricks, and hacks for exploring Washington, D.C. And over at triphacksdc.com, you'll find info about tours and more. One of the first videos I ever published, and still to this day, the most viewed video on this entire channel, are my 10 do's and don'ts for riding on the metro. And because of COVID, some of the details are now out of date. So even if you've seen that other one, don't skip this, because I'm now up to 16 do's and don'ts for riding metro. And with that said, let's get started. Number 1, do get a SmarTrip card or use the SmarTrip app. SmarTrip is your ticket to ride the metro. You can buy a SmarTrip card at any metro station with cash or credit card at any of the blue and orange fare machines. A new SmarTrip card costs $10. $2 of that goes to the physical plastic, and the other $8 is money that you can use for your fares. Everyone in your traveling group needs their own SmarTrip. Unlike in other cities, sharing is not allowed. Now, if you're comfortable with technology, you can skip the physical SmarTrip and buy a virtual SmarTrip card on your phone. I have an entire video about the process of doing this, so check it out in the video description if you want to give it a try. Number 2, don't stand on the left. Look, if there's one and only one thing you take away from this video, please make it this. The universal metro rule is, when you're on an escalator, if you prefer to ride, you can stand on the right. And if you want to walk, you can do that on the left. One reason why DC tourists tend to have a less than stellar reputation is because they don't watch TripHacksDC and don't know about this rule. I'm kidding, kind of. But since you're watching this video, you're already way ahead of the curve. And I'm curious, if you already knew about the walk left, stand right rule, how'd you hear about it? Leave a comment down there under the video and let me know. Number 3, do understand how the pricing works. Metro pricing is different than many other cities, and admittedly can be a little confusing. Generally speaking, your fare will depend on 2 factors: how far you're traveling and whether you're traveling during peak time or not. Peak time roughly coincides with the weekday rush hour. Basically, if you take a short trip at noon, that will cost you less than if you take a long trip during morning rush hour. Except beginning in September 2021, Metro will introduce weekend flat fares. That means if you ride on Saturday or Sunday, you can go wherever you want at any time of day that you want, and that ride will only cost you $2, which I think is awesome and honestly kind of a game changer for folks who are visiting on the weekend. Now, if you need a more detailed explanation about how weekday pricing works, I've got you covered. Check out the description for my video on that exact topic. Number 4, don't buy a SmarTrip card online. In theory, this sounds like a great idea. Buy your card online, have it shipped to your home, so that as soon as you arrive in DC, you're all ready to ride. The problem is, I have heard so many times visitors who told me they did this, and then they forgot to pack the SmarTrip, which completely defeats the purpose since you still need to buy another one once you arrive. So unless you specifically want a commemorative SmarTrip card that you can only get online, just buy one once you get here. Or use the SmarTrip app and pay with your phone if you're comfortable with that. Number 5, do check for upcoming track work. One of the most frustrating things about riding Metro is that for the past decade, it's felt like it's constantly been under construction. Locals love to gripe about this. For example, if Metro is going to be closed south of Reagan National Airport one weekend for track work, then staying in Old Town Alexandria is probably not a good choice. And so you know when it's happening, I'll leave a link down in the description to the planned track work schedule. Number 6, don't ride during rush hour if you can avoid it. Washington, D.C. has a lot of white-collar commuters, and at least from my observation, tend to work slightly earlier hours than in other cities. So you will probably find the heaviest crowds on Metro from roughly 7 a.m. to 9 a.m., and then again from roughly 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., and then again after 7 p.m., tends to be quite a bit less crowded. For visitors, it's worth avoiding rush hour if you can, because people who commute tend to be, for lack of a better word, in a rush. So riding during the off hours can be a lot more chill. Number 7, do give yourself extra time. Metro is a relatively efficient way of getting around, but it's not especially fast. One of my first jobs in DC was 3.5 miles away from my home, and the Metro ride took roughly 30 to 40 minutes, which included walking from my home to the station, waiting for the train, riding the train, and then walking from the station to my office building. And that was a best case scenario. On an unlucky day, if there was a delay or some other problem, it might take 45 to 60 minutes to get home. So if you have tour tickets, a dinner reservation, or anything else that you need to be at a certain time, give yourself some extra time. Otherwise, you're risking cutting it close. Number 8, don't mess with the train doors. One of the most common reasons why Metro breaks down and a train has to go out of service is because of broken doors, which makes sense. The doors have to open at every station, and even a single broken door might take out an entire train until they can fix it. So please, don't touch the doors. Don't lean against the doors when the train is moving. And especially, don't try to hold open a door for someone who's running behind. If your whole group can't board at once, just wait for the next train. Number 9, do wait for everyone else to get off the train before you try to board. When a train pulls into the station, especially if you're a new rider, your instinct might be to rush on as soon as the doors open. Don't do it. You have to wait for everyone who's getting off of the train to fully exit before you can go on. If you try to board before everyone else is off, it creates chaos, and that's not good for anybody. Number 10, don't eat on the Metro. Now, you may have heard a story, which has kind of become Metro lore at this point, about a 12-year-old girl who was arrested for eating a single French fry in a Metro station. That actually happened over 20 years ago, because eating and drinking is against Metro rules. That said, there was quite a bit of backlash over the incident, and questions about whether putting a child in handcuffs was really necessary. So enforcement nowadays is less strict, but it's still the Metro rule, and you should follow it, especially because not eating really helps to cut down on the number of rodents and critters that are much more common in some other cities' subway systems. Number 11, I'm out of fingers. Do download a Metro app. This is different from the SmarTrip app that I mentioned earlier. My personal favorite of these is called Metro Hero, though there are several that do very similar things. So let me know if you have a personal favorite down in the comments, as I'm always curious about what people like. A Metro app serves a few purposes. First, it can tell you when to expect the next train, which is useful if you're inside of a station but not near one of the electronic boards. Or if you are near one, but it's scrolling through a bunch of announcements rather than just showing the train times. And the second is because if you need information about elevators because you're traveling with a stroller or a wheelchair, an app can really help you out. Number 12, don't bother with the unlimited ride passes. Metro currently sells several different versions of unlimited ride passes, which will let you ride as much as your heart desires for a certain number of days. A lot of visitors really overestimate how much they're going to ride the Metro. And these passes are not especially cheap, so they wind up not being a great deal. What I suggest to do is simply add money on your SmarTrip card, use it to pay fares, and top it up if you ever need more. I have an entire video about how to add more money to your card at a fare machine, so check out the video description for that link. Number 13, do avoid unnecessary transfers. This is a really common mistake that I see visitors make. And honestly, it's not entirely their fault. It's the fault of the fact that the Metro map is not to scale. If you look closely at the map, it sort of looks like Metro Center and Gallery Place are a bit spaced apart, when in reality, they're two of the closest stations to each other. So for people attending a game at Capital One Arena, it's often as easy, if not easier, to exit at Metro Center and walk a couple of blocks, rather than transfer to the red line just to ride that one extra stop. Another example of this is that the Smithsonian National Mall station, despite the name, is not actually the closest Metro station to many of the sites on the National Mall. If you're coming in on the green or yellow lines, LaFont Plaza or the Archive station are usually just as good or a better bet. But the thing is, how do you know all this unless you just know? That's where an app like Google Maps or City Mapper comes in handy. Check out my must-have apps video in the description if you want to see them in action. Number 14, don't be surprised if you see people in face masks. Now, at the time I'm publishing this video, face masks are still required to ride Metro, but at some point I fully expect that requirement will be lifted. And this is more of a prediction than anything, but I think you will still see people using them if you had a grandparent who lived through the Great Depression. You know, many of the habits they picked up during that time stuck with them for their entire life. When it comes to Metro, airplanes, and other tight spaces, I predict that if people figure putting on a mask will help prevent them from catching something, even if that's just a cold or the seasonal flu, then why not? Number 15, do check the opening and closing hours. Metro is not a 24-hour subway, nor has it ever been. During COVID, Metro hours got cut back pretty drastically. They have come back quite a bit, but it's still not entirely clear where they're going to settle post-COVID. So if you have plans to be out early or late, make sure to double check those hours. And finally, number 16, don't stand at the top of a Metro escalator. When you finally emerge from a Metro station and you're in an unfamiliar place, I know the urge is to pull out your phone, open up Google Maps, and try to orient yourself. That's fine. Just first, make sure you walk away from the station. If you stop right at the top of the escalator, and there are people coming up behind you, you're going to cause a pileup. And while this might not be as faux pas as standing on the left side of an escalator, it's still pretty bad, and arguably more unsafe. And hey, if you made it this far, then I know you are totally into Metro. So may I suggest my Metro video playlist that has all of my Metro videos in it? Or how about an entire episode of the Trip Hacks DC podcast dedicated to Metro? I will leave links to all of those down in the description. And while you're here, why not check out another Trip Hacks DC video by clicking or tapping right over here to watch the next one. And if you're coming to DC and interested in signing up for a Trip Hacks DC guided tour, you can click or tap on the Capitol Dome on the left side of my head. That'll send you right over to triphacksdc.com where you can see all of the tours that we offer. Enjoy your trip.